And a US-based South African political commentator says she finds it difficult to pick a clear winner after both major parties completed their nominating conventions in the United States. President Donald Trump formally accepted the Republican Party's nomination for a second term last night, following his rival Democrat Joe Biden a week earlier. In a broad-ranging conversation with the SABC Sherwin, Bryce-Pease, Washington-based Palesa Morudu also shared her thoughts on developments here in her home country, where she expressed the view that South Africa has an ANC problem.
Palesa Morudu, thank you so much for speaking with us here on SABC News. We appreciate it.
Thank you, Sherwin.
So we find ourselves in election season in the United States, right, with both conventions now concluded, as campaigns really kick into high gear ahead of November's election. What are your first impressions as a South African living and working in the United States now that we officially have the Trump-Pence versus Biden-Harris tickets?
Yeah, what an interesting time to be living in the United States. So it's been an interesting 2 weeks. Last week we had the Democrats at a convention, and what really came out of that convention was, number one, is the nomination of Kamala Harris as the first Black woman to come as a vice president for a major party. That was quite a significant thing. And secondly was that the message from the Democrats was that, we are a diverse party, which is fantastic. And secondly is that, we are not, or rather Vice President Joe Biden is not Donald Trump. So that was the message that came out of the Democrats. Now you have the Republicans having their own convention this week, and both parties are obviously having the conventions virtually because of the COVID-19 situation that's affecting the entire world, and more so in the United States than anywhere else. So the Republicans this week are talking about a few things. I mean, it's centered around the personality of President Donald Trump. It says to the public, to the American people, that he is a tough guy, that he is the guy that is, he's new to Washington. He's not a Washington insider, as they say, and that he gets things done. He is the businessman who gets things done. Now, what is going to be critical is whether the swing voters in the United States are getting the messages from both the Democrats and the Republicans. I mean, I think by now, you have a whole lot of people who have decided that, how they're going to vote. But there are a lot of swing voters. I think the FT this week has said that, the polls are saying that Biden is 52 and Donald Trump is sitting at 40% of the vote. But you have a lot of swing voters, and the appeal is to that swing voter. Are they going to be convinced about the messages that are coming out of the Democrats or the message that's coming out of the Republican Party?
So let me jump in and talk about what some of those messages are, right? You have Biden and Democrats arguing that the character of our nation is on the ballot as they make this case against the lack of empathy and at times the boorishness that has come to define President Donald Trump. And then on the other hand, you have Republicans casting Democrats as unruly socialists who will forever change the character of the nation. I think Vice President Pence talking about, it's about retaining the America that we know. How do you score these two divergent messages?
Yeah, I mean, I think the Democrats are making a convincing case about, the character of the United States, that, it is un-American to not be welcoming of immigrants. It's un-American to not have everyone enjoy the rights that are guaranteed under the Constitution of the United States. That is a compelling message, but I do think that people want more than that, because people are living through a hardship right now. You have millions of Americans who are unemployed as a result of COVID-19. You have millions of Americans who have lost their health care. And I don't think that the Democrats are making a compelling case addressing the bread and butter issues that Americans are facing right now. On the other hand, I just don't think that the message is going to land that Joe Biden is somewhat of a Fidel Castro. It's just not going to land. But I think what would land is, I think that, some of the characters that you see in the Black Lives Matter, in terms of, people being very rowdy and looting, etc., that can appeal to some element of the American voter, because people really just want to have peace and quiet and go on with it, in as much as they want to be part of, of the Black Lives Matter. But people are appalled by, the behavior that's looting, etc. And I think what the Republicans are trying to do is to appeal to that kind of voter who's not an activist, who's just an ordinary American.
I mean, you raise an important point, right? What we do see emerging from post the Republican convention as a factor is this law and order narrative from them, casting the looters, casting the rioters in the aftermath of police shootings of black men as emblematic of what America would look like under a Biden-Harris presidency. Is the chaos on the streets of America a boon for the incumbent?
I do think that the vast majority of people who've been in the streets for weeks and weeks have been pretty much peaceful. I mean, millions and millions of Americans marched in support of Black Lives Matter, in support of social justice, in support of, in opposition to what the cops are doing to black men in particular, against police brutality. And a lot of people have been in the streets and they've been pretty much peaceful. There's few elements who have, I mean, I think there's a few things. One is, your agent provocateurs, or even your anarchists and so on. But I think it is a very small element. And I think what's coming out of the Republican Party convention is to capitalize on that and grab on that and say, I, as President Donald Trump, I will become the president of law and order in the United States.
So let me ask you this, right? The police shootings of George Floyd, Breonna Taylor, Ahmaud Arbery, most recently Jacob Blake, and so many others leading to the March on Washington today, the 57th anniversary of that march where MLK Jr. delivered the I Have a Dream speech, where the late John Lewis was the youngest speaker at that march. In 1963, is this a moment that can resonate in such a divided country?
I don't necessarily think it's similar to the spontaneity of what we saw over the past few weeks, just anger in the streets. And I think it's being channeled right now to say, okay, we are going to demand a few things. And what I understand the march is about defunding the police, or rather some intervention around policing in the United States, as well as highlighting and bringing the families of the people who have been victims of police brutality to headline the march and talk to several thousands of people who will be in the march. Whether it's a pivotal moment, I don't necessarily think it's the same. I mean, there's something about spontaneity and something different to a march that's kind of organized in a sense.
So let me change focus. I want to touch a bit on the public health emergency brought on by the coronavirus. You've written about the competing interests between the economic and the public health imperatives in the United States as it relates to COVID-19. What's your analysis of that conflict and how it has manifested itself in the US?
The administration has been, I almost want to say that, irresponsible. I mean, I could use a very strong term, but I would just use the term irresponsible in terms of how they've responded to this. First of all, I mean, President Donald Trump thought it was just going to disappear. It was just simply going to disappear. But of course it's not going to disappear. It's not disappearing. And I think part of it also is because these are not, the people who are dying are not his constituency or the constituency of the Republican Party. These are poor people, poor black and brown people who are dying in their numbers. The solution comes out of people putting pressure on power to act in their own interest. And if there is no power, and that's why you have a lot of people in the streets, it's not just about, social justice issues around police brutality, but it's also about the other issues, the impact of COVID-19 on the well-being of people. People are in New York, for example, people are now facing eviction because they cannot pay rent, because they don't have the money to pay rent, because they have been laid off from their jobs. I mean, these are just the realities that people are facing in major cities like, New York City, in the West Coast and many other cities like that. People are facing real issues. So they don't have healthcare. They don't have money to pay their rent, and all the subsidies that are coming out of the state have now stopped. Right? We don't have the subsidies coming anymore. That $600 per month or per week is not coming anymore. And people are facing real issues around eviction. And what do they do? What do we do? There is no solution. You say it's politicized. It's politicized in that sense,
Well, I imagine the solution will be November 3rd's election to a certain degree.
Well, we'll see. We'll see. I mean, I'm saying to you that I see the elections in November as 50-50 as things stand. I'm not particularly convinced that I can call these elections. I think it's going to be quite too close to call, because I don't think that the Democrats are putting a very convincing platform other than we are a diverse party and we are not Donald Trump. And on the other hand, I think Donald Trump is putting forward a message that says, you can vote for me because I'm a tough guy. And secondly, I mean, they've been very, very clever in putting some of the Black Republicans to speak at the convention. And that's really to say to Americans who are on the fence, to say, okay, we are not those racists that everyone else say we are. And it's not really about convincing Black people to vote for Donald Trump. It's really to talk to that swing voter who says, I'm not sure about you, Donald Trump, because I really think you are a racist. But when, you see Black people speaking at the Republican Party and say, vote for this guy, you say, okay, maybe he's not so bad after all. If Black people are saying vote for him, maybe he's not. So it's a very, very sleek messaging that's happening coming out of the Republican Party.
Well, we still have the debates to look forward to, so we'll see kind of how those play out. That's kind of the next iteration of this contest. I want us to just change focus a little bit and talk a bit about South Africa. I know you keep a keen eye on your home country. You'll have seen the August 19 New York Times article with the headline, South Africa's biggest coronavirus aid effort tainted by corruption. It continues, quote, as South Africans cope with hunger in the pandemic, government efforts at delivering relief have floundered amidst widespread allegations of fraud and mismanagement, close quotes. What's your analysis at looking at these developments from afar?
First of all, the coverage on South Africa, at the beginning of the pandemic was quite positive about, how the South African government was handling the whole pandemic. Very positive coverage around very decisive leadership, building social solidarity and support generally on the efforts that government of South Africa was making to pull everyone behind and say that, we are in this together. And those were positive messages coming out. But now, it's not only the New York Times. If you go to the FT, you go to to publications in Europe, in the United States, it's the message of corruption coming up. I mean, you cannot even think how bad this is. To have money aimed for people who are in dire straits as a result of COVID-19 being eaten, literally. Stolen from them. It is awful, and that is brand South Africa right now. It's a South Africa that is mired in corruption and without decisive leadership.
Let me read you a little bit more from that article. On the 500 billion rand relief package announced in April, it reads as following, that relief efforts have instead become a source of embarrassment for President Cyril Ramaphosa, who was elected on a platform of stamping out corruption. So I wonder, Palesa, what you have made of President Ramaphosa's leadership in particular during this crisis as it relates both to the country that he leads and the ruling party, the African National Congress that he leads.
I've always said that South Africa doesn't have, it's got one major problem, and that problem is it's got an ANC problem more than anything else. And the reason I say that is because, and I think many people in South Africa and people around the world have heard what President Cyril Ramaphosa said, that he needs to fix the ANC. And I've said many times that we as South Africans are so obsessed with what happens inside the ANC. It's the palace politics, and we are fixated by what happens in there. And I like before, under apartheid, it's only when South Africans come out and say, you know what, this and no more. That's when things change. But if we're going to fixate on giving President Ramaphosa an opportunity to fix the ANC, well, he's not going to fix the ANC because it's almost impossible to fix the ANC. But what really needs to happen is that South Africans themselves have got to take it upon ourselves to say we are going to fix South Africa. And how fixing that South Africa, what form it takes, is going to depend on us making that decision. But I don't necessarily think that we can rely on him fixing the ANC because, the ANC is our major problem.
How would you then characterize South Africa's brand internationally? You touched on this earlier. What's your synopsis on how this brand resonates across the world today?
I don't think it resonates. I don't necessarily think that. I'm in Washington D.C. I think this, it remains a major economy. So does Kenya. So is Ethiopia and Nigeria. These are major, in Angola. These are major economies. And I think from a policy point of view, people who are in policy in Washington, D.C., they are keeping an eye on what's happening. But generally, I don't necessarily think we matter that much anymore. We really don't, because the brand that's coming out of South Africa is a brand of, endemic corruption. And until we deal with that and we begin to change the economy and we begin to deal with, people who are dragging us along this path, and until this decisive leadership, which we're not seeing that right now, until this decisive leadership, the brand South Africa is going to remain that of corruption and mismanagement. And, sadly, that is the situation.
Well, thank you so much for sharing your insights with me. I always like some honesty in a conversation like this.
Thank you, Sherwin.
Palesa Morudu is a writer and a director at Clarity Global Communications, based both in Cape Town and in Washington, D.C., from where she is speaking to us today.
Thank you.